All right, hey, welcome back. We're going to cover chapter 6 here. Going to get into one of my favorite topics, which is the Reformation, or the Protestant Reformation. And we'll cover the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Get myself up here in the corner out of the way. Hopefully everybody can see. All right. So if you look back in history, there's a number of kind of turning events or turning points of history. And I would argue that you're probably going to be hard pressed to find one that's more influential than around 1440 when Johann Gutenberg created the first movable type printing press. Now, he's not the person that invented the printing press. That was done by the Chinese. They would use a wooden block printing press, and the problem with that is the wood, when it got dipped into the ink, would expand when it was wet, and it would contract when it was dry, and then the letters would split. So it was very time consuming to redo all the letters. And Gutenberg is the first one to use metal plated letters. And so it was the metal movable type printing press that he did. And this allows him to print large numbers of pages or books. And it's really going to change the way that information is passed from person to person. Now, I think we just recently went through one of these changes in how information is passed. And you guys are kind of witnessing the tail end of it. When I was a kid, you would get a lot of information from newspapers. It was not uncommon for maybe a family that enjoyed reading the news and being informed and being up to date. It wouldn't necessarily be that uncommon when I was in high school or even early part of college for a family to subscribe to multiple newspapers. Now it's pretty unlikely that that people subscribe to newspapers at all. Most of the newspapers are the subscriptions are online or the information is online, and most of the people will either get their news from online sources or from cable television. And so you're seeing this shift in how people get information today. You go back in the 1440s, all of a sudden information becomes available to everybody through the printed word. And so literacy is going to increase, and access to information is going to increase dramatically because of Gutenberg. And so there we go. There's Gutenberg on the left, and there's an example of Gutenberg's printing press on the right. And to us, it would seem very very rudimentary, very, very simple. You'd have to print one page at a time, but you have to realize we're coming from a period of time before this printing press, everything was hand copied. And so like, if I could print off, 100 pages of a book in, 20 minutes, that's a heck of a lot faster than the, multiple months it would take a monk somewhere to copy down those 20 pages. So we moved quite a bit faster. Okay, and so why is this invention going to bring about such a change in society? Well, it's going to bring about a change because one, it's the way that it changes the way people get information, but also it's going to lead to a deconstruction of how people get their information. Before 1440, most people would gather at the church on Sundays or go to church doors or go to church multiple times a week, and they would be told what to think and what to believe and who to listen to and who not to listen to. And most of this information is going to come directly from the Catholic Church. And so if you look all the way back into history, if you go back to history, 1408, the beginnings of Western civilization, once the Roman Empire falls in 476, like Rome, the Western Roman Empire falls, the Catholic Church is really the only stabilizing force that remains, and the head of that church is the Pope. And there's actually multiple leaders of the church at that time, and the Pope in Rome kind of ends up condensing his power. And so they take over the church stuff, but they also take over a lot of administrative stuff in society. And it was a place for social mobility if you wanted to join the church, not necessarily for religious reasons, but for reasons to advance in society. Maybe you were from a noble family and you were a male child that was born down the line. So like, the firstborn would get all of the all of the land, and typically the second child would join the military. And it wasn't uncommon if you had 3 boys for the third boy to join the priesthood, because there wasn't a lot of it was pretty safe, because if the heir, the firstborn, died, well, then you have the second one. Well, he died in battle, then you don't want the third one to be in battle also, in the military also. So put him in the church, and then whatever, he could become king or whatever he needs to, or noble. So you look at, you're in a situation where 1 in 75 people work inside the church, and so that's almost I don't know, it's a little less than a little more than 1% of the population. Okay, and the church is going to supervise things like births and deaths and marriage and wills and contracts and laws. And so they're going to take on all of the responsibilities that you would associate with a city government, local government, state governments. Okay. And so they do all that, but at the same time, the church is also in the business of saving your soul. They don't want you dirty sinners to go to hell. And so the church is the only way to heaven, but it's also the only way that you can get married. It's the only way that you can get a will. It's the only way that you can ratify contracts. And so the priests are trying to give sacraments. They're trying to do confessions and communions and all of that stuff. They're also trying to deal with all the other bureaucratic duties that go along with running a kind of an empire of Europe in the Middle Ages. And the Pope is going to oversee all of this. And so when you really look at it, the Pope is overseeing, the Pope is overseeing a huge business, and businesses have to make money. And so over the Middle Ages, you deal with the Black Death, and before the Renaissance, a large percentage of Europe's population is wiped out, and that's going to cut into the church's income. You start to see the growth of the power of the kings in Spain and France, and other kingdoms pop up outside of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Holy Roman Empire, basically, if you kind of think of it as Germany, and then you have the Papal States that are Rome, modern day Italy for a lesser extent, but they're all individual city states at this point. But so the church starts to see some of its power get eroded away, and they look for new ways to increase money coming into the church. Money equals power. How much money can I get? And so the church not only becomes a religious institution, but it's also a political institution. And so a lot of the popes and priests and people in there see this as a political position, not necessarily as a religious position. And so there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of hanky-panky going on with some of the members of the church. It's not that uncommon for nuns and bishops, or probably pretty uncommon for a nun to have a kid, but for bishops or monks or whoever to have children outside of marriage. And so, as the church grows in power, the church grows in abilities to get money, it brings more people with non-religious goals into the church. And so all this money and all of this power starts to lead to people calling for a change in the church. Probably the best example that I have is of a Bohemian monk by the name of Jan Hus. And Hus was a Bohemian, which is a part of Germany, basically, or Czechoslovakia, modern day Czech Republic or Slovakia. And he was giving mass in the native language of the people. He was translating the Bible into the native language, and he's giving people access to God. And this really upset the church. And then Hus starts to call for some reforms. And so what the church does is basically they reach out to Hus and they're like, hey, you got to come to this meeting and we're going to talk about some of the reforms. We like some of your ideas. And when he shows up, he's captured and he's burned at the stake. He's killed to silence him. And this is kind of the way of the church back in the day, because if you want to bring about change, you need to go out and you need to verbally express your ideas to other people. And so without the invention of the printing press, you have no way to get ideas across other than face to face or through other people. And that's all going to change in 1440 when Johann Gutenberg invents the printing press and allows us to convey ideas without meeting people, putting our ideas on paper in large quantities and sending them out. And the idea from the church that's really going to bring about this need for reform is this idea of indulgences. And indulgences were one of the sacrilege of the church. And basically, it works like this. The Catholic Church believes in three levels of afterlife. You have heaven, and that's where saints go if they die with a pure soul. And then you have hell, and that's where the really bad, unsaved people go. And then you have purgatory, and purgatory is where the people go when you're a good person, but you got some sins to burn off, and so you might have to go to purgatory for 100 years, and then you get to go to heaven for eternity or whatever. And so if you think about it, like you go to church and you confess your sins, and you're absolved from your sins, and you do your penance at the church, and you walk out, and before you have a chance to sin again, like in mind, body, or soul, you get hit by a bus, bam, straight to heaven. You died of a pure soul, right? But like, let's say you do the same thing, you do your penance, and then you see, I don't know, like you see your mortal enemy walking in the church, and you have negative thoughts about them. While you go outside to get hit by a bus, well, you're going to go to purgatory to burn off those negative thoughts or those sins against those people. Okay, so here's what indulgence might have looked like, or modern day what it looks like. That's an annulment. That doesn't matter. And so purgatory is where most people start their afterlife. They spend a few hundred or 1,000 years burning off their sins here in the middle, not necessarily good or bad, just in the middle. And then once they're pure, their soul's purified, they can go on to heaven. And an indulgence can be awarded or bought to lessen the time one has to spend in purgatory. You give a little gift to the church, and the church can take some time off of your sentence in purgatory. And they come about really because of like religious wars or the Crusades, and people go into the Holy Lands during the Crusades, and they do some pretty unspeakable things. And so the Pope basically would offer a blanket indulgence of forgiveness of sins that were carried out during the Crusades or whatever, right? Persecution of non-Christians, right? And so so the Pope would do that and just kind of give everybody a get out of jail free card. But as we move into the 1300s, the 1400s, the church needs more and more money to pay for wars and art and things that they're beginning to do during the Renaissance. They build these big cathedrals. Following the bubonic plague or the Black Death, a large percentage of the population dies out, so your tithing base kind of gets reduced. And so we come up with this idea, the church comes up with this idea of indulgences. They're going to sell them. They're going to make lots of money for people. Here we go. There's some artwork that goes on there. And so in indulgences, basically, they come out of this idea that Jesus died with a perfect soul. Like Jesus committed no sins, and so therefore he has a treasury of merit. He has like extra coins. He has extra lives. It's like I use the example of unlimited lives on a video game. You guys probably don't remember this or know this, but like on Contra, which was part of the original 8-bit Nintendo from 1,000,000 years ago, there was a special code that you punch in and you would get unlimited lives and unlimited ammunition. And so it was like the first widespread used cheat code. Well, indulgences are kind of like that. There's a cheat code for life or the afterlife. And if you die with enough indulgences, regardless of what you did in life, you're going to go to heaven. And so here's the problem. If I have enough money, then all of a sudden I can buy my way into heaven. And then, why would anybody, if you could buy your way into heaven, why would you do that? And then additionally, could anybody do anything that's good enough to get into heaven? Aren't we all sinners, and aren't we all fall short of the grace of God? And don't we need the salvation of Jesus? And so, could you technically buy your way into heaven without believing in in God, if you bought in God and Jesus and the resurrection and all the ideas of Christianity without could you get into heaven if you just bought enough indulgences? And this gentleman right here, Martin Luther, didn't think so. Martin Luther is a monk in Germany, and he was a professor at the University of Wittenberg in Germany, kind of northern Germany. And he starts to kind of question some of the teachings of the church and some of the teachings of indulgences and these ideas. And he's a subject to the Holy Roman Emperor. So he's not necessarily, his kingdom, his area is ruled over by one of the Habsburgs that we'll talk about a little bit later, who's heavily influenced by the Pope. So the Pope is not necessarily in charge of the area that he lives in. Obviously, the Pope is in charge of the church that Luther is a monk for. Okay. It's the Holy Roman Empire is one of the first, or is the second first most powerful organization in Europe. What does that mean? It means it's probably second in power to the Pope, right? But at the same time, the Pope really can't do anything without the blessings of the Holy Roman Empire, because the Pope and the Vatican and the Catholic Church don't have enough money to wage war against the Holy Roman Empire because they're so powerful. But the Holy Roman Empire kind of needs the Pope as their blessing to justify their rule over everybody. Okay. So there we go. So it's ruled by the Holy Roman Empire. He's not the Pope, but he needs the Pope's support. And so Luther lives in this area, and Luther comes to believe that salvation was through faith alone, and that we're either saved or we're not saved through our beliefs or not through our actions. And Luther comes up with that idea again, like, how could anyone be good enough to get into heaven? How could you do anything that's good enough to get into heaven? And so Luther believes that you have to earn your salvation through your beliefs, through your faith, and not through your works. And that's problematic for the Catholic Church, because part of the Catholic Church's faith beliefs are faith and works. And so in 1577, the Pope Leo X issues a new indulgence to fund the building projects in Rome. He's going to build St. Peter's. He's going to build the dome, the dome in St. Peter's. He's going to do lots of different things, right? And so he sends out a whole bunch of priests to sell these indulgences. And these indulgences are very similar to what's been sold in the past. You have less time in purgatory, and you also you have less time in purgatory, but you can also apply that indulgence to other relatives. And so Johann Drizell is out in Wittenberg. He's selling indulgences. And basically he's selling this idea that if you donate roughly the equivalent of $20,000 today to the church, roughly the cost of a year's salary, so let's say $20,000 to $40,000, you could free your relatives from purgatory. And this is aimed at relatively poor people, farmers, peasants, people that are barely getting by, and trying to take advantage of them. And the sales slogan at that time was, "When the coin rings, the soul springs," right? Because anything that rhymes makes me want to spend money. And so Luther goes out and he sees this guy and he gets so upset, and he goes back and he writes out 95 objections to the church. And he nails it, to the church door, and the 95 Theses, and basically just points out 95 things that he thinks are wrong with the church. And he's seen as the first action in the Protestant Reformation. He takes it to the church door and he hammers it on church door, because that's where people get their information, and people read it and like, oh, that kind of makes sense. And so he does that. And if it was 1340, probably nothing would have happened. But it's 1517, 1520. Do I have an actual date here? And Luther has the ability to take his work of the 95 Theses and put it in a printing press and send it out. And so Luther's not trying to split up the church. What he's trying to do is make it better. He's like, hey, you know what? We can work on these couple things. And he's trying to spark debate within the church. And so he starts to print out ideas and send them out. And he just lays out this idea ideas to limit greed and corruption, and he questions the idea that the Pope is infallible. And eventually he translates it to German, and it begins to spread an influence. And so it starts off inside the church, and people begin to like the ideas. It starts to pick up a little bit of steam. The church, of course, doesn't like it, and it goes other places. And so Luther's basic idea was the Catholic Church and the Pope were not necessary for salvation. The things like indulgences and sacraments and works couldn't get somebody to heaven. The only way to heaven was to believe in Jesus, the Christian Jesus, that he died for your sins and was resurrected, and that he believed in this idea of a priesthood of believers, in which everybody should get together and read the Bible in their own language and work together to form a better understanding of the written word, which sounds pretty awesome, right? The problem for the Catholic Church is the Catholic Church's language, scholar language, is in Latin, so the Bibles are in Latin. Most people don't read Latin, and so you go to church and the priest tells you what the Bible says and what it means. Well, now all of a sudden, if you can read it and you can form your own ideas, that's problematic, right? That takes away the power of the priest and the power of the church. So, problematic for the church, and the church is going to reach out to Luther and be like, "Hey, buddy, stop." And of course, Luther doesn't. And we should also go ahead and point out here that if I'm able to read the Bible and figure out what I like about it and pay attention to those passages, and you're able to do the same thing, well, we're probably going to come out with different ideas. And Luther believed that we would talk those out and work them out. But obviously, you can drive around town and you can see the number of different churches, regardless of where you are, or denominations. So everybody's going to have different ideas about what they should do. Okay, so in 1521, Luther gets called to Rome to express his ideas. And Luther's no dummy. He remembers what happened to Jan Hus and all of those things. And so he doesn't go to Rome. And so in 1521, after Luther refuses to go to Rome, the Holy Roman Empire holds a meeting, a diet as a gathering, in the German town of Worms. So it's called the Diet of Worms. And Luther says, that sounds awful. I'm not going to the Diet of Worms. I don't want to eat that, right? And Charles V orders Luther to stop and take back his statements. And Luther says, no, I'm not going to. We have problems within the church. We need to fix them. And so Luther gets excommunicated from the church, and he's declared an outlaw. And anybody that offers Luther food or water could be killed. And if you see him, you could kill Martin Luther with no legal penalty. So like there's a price on his head from the Catholic Church. And Luther all of a sudden finds himself in really the kind of same spot that Jan Hus was in, 200 years before. The difference is Luther's able to go into hiding. And so Luther goes into hiding and stays with one of the more powerful princes of the Holy Roman Empire, of the German area, Frederick the Wise. Okay, and so he hangs out in his palace. He continues to write, and he continues to publish works using the printing press. And so other German princes begin to see, much like Frederick the Wise, that if they support Luther, there's financial gain in it for them. Because you go back and we look at this map of Europe right here. We're talking about these areas in northern Germany up in here, and that's a long way from Rome. And so if you could keep money that comes into your area, or 10% of the tithe or whatever, if you could keep that in home instead of sending it to Rome, you're going to be a lot better off. And really, what's the Pope, who's all the way down here, going to care about a small little German area, there's Saxony, in the north? And so there's reason for these German princes to support Luther, and they start to do that. And so you start to see, the heavy green is where Catholicism remains. And this pink color here is where you start to see some of Luther's ideas and Protestantism begin to spread. And you can see the further away from the papal states you get, the more likely you are to see Protestantism. Okay, Luther translates the Bible into German. People start to read it. More and more church followers begin to follow Luther. By the 1530s, people start to follow Luther because, again, gives them power over their life, and this causes a split with the Catholic Church of the Protestant Church and the Catholic Church. And Charles V, who is the Holy Roman Empire, emperor, is not able to stop the split. And so he basically agrees to allow German princes to choose for their kingdom which religion they're going to follow. And he hopes they're going to allow them to continue to receive military help if they need to the Holy Roman Empire. But hey, you want to be a Lutheran, that's cool. You just have to send me troops. And so they do. So Germany gets divided in half. We kind of talked about that. Half Lutheran, half Catholic. And it's really going to depend on where, there's another map here, where you are located in Germany. Are you southern Germany? Well, you're pretty close to Rome and Italy. You're probably going to remain Catholic. Up here in northern Germany, more than likely, you're going to become Protestant. Now, one reason that the Holy Roman Emperor is going to allow this split is this peasant uprising that you guys are going to read about. Basically, if you allow people to read and think for themselves, and then you treat them like crap, they're going to revolt. And that's exactly what happens. The Black Death leads to this drop in population, which means there's less people to work, right? And so all of a sudden, there's less people to work, and they want more money to work. It's kind of what we're going through right now, right? And so the peasants start to not only want more money, but better treatment. They start to revolt against this idea of serfdom, which isn't necessarily slavery, but it's pretty doggone close. And Luther's idea of priesthood of believers, right? That if there's equality among the common people, well, shouldn't there be equality between nobility and common people if we're all able to read the Bible and understand it for ourselves? And didn't God make us all in his image, right? And so the peasants begin to rise up against the nobility. You start to see a revolt, and the nobility reacts very harshly to this. And Luther comes out against the uprising and basically puts down the peasants and like, hey, you know what? Peasants aren't worth, they aren't capable of understanding all these things that we're talking about. He writes for the killing of the peasants because they're not doing God's will. Like, God put the peasants on earth to serve the nobles. And somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 peasants are killed in this uprising from 1524 to 1525. And one of the reasons the peasants struggle is the lack of communication and military resources to fight back against the nobility. Okay, so you have situations like that where the peasantry are going to rise up, trying to better their life or trying to better argue for their understanding of the Bible. And if they're going to do that, don't you think also religious scholars are going to do the same thing? And so John Calvin is a follower of Luther, or one of his early supporters, and he actually helps him organize and found the Lutheran Church. However, he has some different beliefs than Luther. He read the Bible, and he does this. He believes that faith is the only way to salvation, just like Luther, and that's the big the big attraction to Lutheranism or Protestantism. But the big difference between Calvinism and Lutheranism is this idea of predestination. And predestination just means this, that God is all-knowing. And so, like, he already knows if you're going to heaven or if you're going to hell before you're born, or, right after you're born. And God is going to save certain people, and he's not going to save others. And so humans can really do nothing to be saved or to be damned. And if you're going to be one of the sinners, then you're going to be sinners regardless. And if you're going to be one of the saints, you're going to be a saint regardless. And then if you're a sinner that's going to convert to a saint, later in life, there's nothing that you can do, or there's nothing that the church can do to bring about that conversion. Um, and so it's interesting because Calvinism basically says, look, only the saved can live Christian lives, and if you're a Christian and you're saved, you should get God's promise or God's favor, and so you're probably going to make money in your endeavors and those things. And so Calvin moves away from Luther in the 1540s and sets up a theocracy in Geneva, Switzerland. And a theocracy is just a government that's ran by the church leaders. And he tries to build what he's going to consider a truly Christian society of hard work and discipline and thrift and honesty and morality. He's going to outlaw things like fighting and swearing and spitting and laughing in church and dancing. And he's really going to push the education. He wants every boy and girl to be able to read and write so they can read the Bible and understand the Bible. And that's one of the things about Protestantism and Calvinism and this Protestant Reformation that's going to come about and bring about probably the largest amount of change. Isn't the fact that like where you go to church on Sunday is going to change, but the fact that you're going to be able to read and write, and a larger percentage of people are going to be able to read and write and understand and bring about change and understanding to their society. Okay, talked about financial success, right? And so Calvinism takes hold in places like Switzerland and France and Scotland. And the Puritans that actually come and found New England were Calvinists. The Pilgrims, the Puritan church, breaks off of some of the, they break away from England because of the Church of England. And it was the Church of England, Anglican Church was too much like the Catholic Church for them. And so they decided to change. So eventually, Luther and Calvin, who were one-time friends and co-workers, they begin to see each other as enemies, and they begin to claim that, hey, I am the only one that knows what's going on. And Calvin's like, no, I'm the only one that knows what's going on. The church is like, you're both wrong. And so we end up having these weird religious wars that are going to break out all over Europe because of that. And so you're going to have a situation where the Protestants are fighting the Calvinists, and the Calvinists are fighting the Catholics, and the Protestants are fighting the Catholics, and you're going to have different religious sects that break out, like the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists are going to come about, and they're going to reject the idea of childhood salvation through baptism. And meanwhile, while all of that is going on, we're going to have a king over in England, and his name is King Henry VIII. And England is going to miss out on all the religious turmoil, mostly because of King Henry, and he's going to have his own turmoil. King Henry VIII was a strict Catholic. In fact, he was actually given an award by the Pope for keeping England Catholic during the early part of the Reformation. But Henry has a problem. He needs a son, and here's Henry, young Henry over here, and this is his wife, Catherine of Aragon. And if you remember, Elizabeth of Aragon was the Queen of Spain that allows Columbus to go look for the New World. Well, she's part of our Aragon family, right? And she was originally married off to Henry's brother, Henry VII. And Henry VII died at a very young age, and Henry VIII takes the throne, right? And so not only does he take the throne, but he takes his brother's wife, because I know it's kind of gross, but like back in the day, marriage was more of a political institution, and you have this wife of the former king of England, and she's a Spanish princess, and what's she going to do? You can't send her back to Spain because she's already been married, and might as well just marry her off to the brother of the king, who's going to act as new king. And they're actually married for quite a while. They're married for, I think, 15, 18 years. The problem is they can't have a baby. And Catherine would get pregnant, and she would carry the baby, and she would lose it. Or she would get pregnant again, and she would lose it. And that drove Henry a little crazy. And then what really drove Henry crazy was at one point, Henry was in France doing whatever kings do. and there was an uprising in Scotland, and Catherine rode out with some of the troops, and she put down the uprising in Scotland. And so Catherine of Aragon becomes wildly popular in England because of her ability to put down the Scots and to put down this uprising. And this starts to drive Henry mad. He gets very, very upset. But then Catherine gets pregnant again, and Henry's like, all right, well, we'll wait this one out and see what happens. And poor old Catherine, well, she has a daughter, and they name her Mary, and that just won't do for Henry because he needs a boy. And Catherine's getting a little older, and Henry doesn't know what to do. And so Henry has a mistress by the name of Anne Boleyn. And actually, Henry's previous mistress was Anne's sister. And Anne's father is kind of the one that sets this up, which sounds really kind of gross, and it is, but it's all politically based. And so Anne's father was trying to improve his political standings through his daughters. And so he promises Henry that if he and Anne do the deed, that Anne will bless him with a son. But he must marry Anne first. And so Henry asked the Pope for an annulment, saying that he was lied to about his wife not being a virgin when they married. Well, he already knew that Catherine was married to his brother. So anyways, the Pope refuses. And the Pope refuses for a number of different reasons. One of the main reasons is that he's being held prisoner by the Holy Roman Emperor, who was Catherine's nephew. And so if the Pope allows King Henry VIII to divorce the Holy Roman Emperor's aunt, he probably is going to be separated from his head very shortly. And so the Pope refuses his request, and Henry looks over at what's going on in Germany and the fact that they just started their own church, and Henry's like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to start my own church. And so he decides he's going to start the Anglican Church, and he's going to call it the Church of England, right? And he keeps basically all the same religious stuff as Catholicism, but instead of the Pope being the head of the church, Henry makes himself the head of the church, and he grants himself a divorce. And he gives a bunch of Catholic Catholic noblemen a bunch of church lands that he captures from the Catholic Church. And he kind of makes everybody happy, or makes everybody in England a little bit happy. And so Henry is allowed to divorce Catherine of Aragon, and he sends her off because you can't kill her because she's a Spanish princess, and she lives kind of in exile the rest of her life. He marries his mistress, Anne Boleyn, and they close their eyes and hold hands and wish really, really hard, and that's what people do when they want kids. And poof, Anne gets pregnant, and she delivers a daughter whose name is Elizabeth, who will go on to be a great queen. But Henry doesn't need a queen, a daughter, he needs a son. And so he frames Anne Boleyn for having an affair with her own brother. And then he marries Jane Seymour, and Jane understood the assignment and the fact that, hey, I'm only as good as if I can produce a son. And so she does. She gives a son, Edward, and then promptly gets sick and dies. And if the story stopped there, it would be interesting enough. But Henry goes on and marries 3 more times. He marries a lady by the name of Anna Cleves, who I guess kind of catfished the king. He saw a portrait and he thought that she was really pretty and decided he wanted to marry her. And then she showed up and she didn't look like the portrait. And so he said he didn't want that. And then he married Catherine Howard, who was 18, and Henry VIII at this point is in his early 50s, and Henry wants to sit around and watch Fox News at night, and Catherine wants to go to the club. And so eventually Catherine fools around on the king, and Henry finds out, and he chops off her head. And then he marries another Catherine. He marries Catherine Parr, and by this point, Henry's pretty much on his deathbed and dies, and Catherine Parr survives out. And so Edward takes the throne. He tries to convert the country back to Protestantism because he's very young and everybody's upset. And then he dies at the age of 15. And his sister, who was Henry's first child, Mary, becomes queen. And she tries to convert England back to Catholicism. It's interesting that Mary will be married. Mary will marry. Mary will marry Charles II of Spain, who will become King of England and King of Spain. Anyways, she reverts everybody back to Catholicism. Everyone's very happy, especially the people that had taken on the ideas of Protestantism or Anglicanism. And so she kills a large number of Protestants that revolt against her, and she gets the nickname of Bloody Mary because she kills so many people. And eventually Mary dies, and she dies without producing a son or an heir. And so we have to go even further down the line, and we marry Elizabeth, or we get to Elizabeth, who was the third daughter, I guess, second daughter, second child of King Henry VIII. And she takes over, and she rules England for a long period of time. I think close to 80 years. And Elizabeth, she oversees this period of high culture and colonial growth, and she sees England become a major global player, which we'll talk to. She returns everybody back to Anglicanism, which is kind of a compromise between Catholicism and Protestantism. She ends the religious persecution and forced conversions, and she is just a regular queen, and we can talk about her at a later date. Okay, and so then I guess we'll just move on to this. After Elizabeth's death, James I takes the throne, and he's followed by Charles I, and there's more persecution of Puritans, and that's what leads to the Pilgrims, and I guess that's what I was getting with that slide, to kind of just give you an idea. But like, if you look at what's going on in England, that's pretty mild compared to what's going on in places like Germany, where entire nations are fighting against each other, or city-states are fighting against each other for control. And so, you know, the Catholics are going to hold on to power in places like Spain and Italy, and we kind of talked about that. The Eastern Orthodox Church is going to hold on to power in places like in Greece and the Balkans and Russia and modern day Turkey. And they're going to be kind of unaffected by the Reformation. And the Protestants are going to gain power in places in Northern Europe. It's typically the further away from Rome, the more likely you're going to see Protestant churches and power develop. In some places like Northern Germany, Scandinavia, Scotland, England, those types of places. And so you can see our final map here. You have the Anglican Church, which is in England. It's still there. It's in that purple. The Calvinists take over in Scotland. Ireland remains Catholic. Places like France and Spain, Italy, Catholic. And then Protestantism up here in that Northern Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Scandinavia area. Okay. And then the Catholic response. Here we go. So one of the reasons that the Reformation is so successful was that the Catholic Church has a ton of problems. You have bad popes, you have corruption. You know, they don't speak the same language as the people. Everything in Catholicism is done in Latin. And so, you know, the common people don't even speak the same language. You have the Inquisition, which goes out and searches for people, and they look for people that charge people with heresy, which is crimes against the church, and they torture them. And they try to ensure that people are following the ways of the Catholic Church through force. And the Catholics reject this idea of translating the Bible into the common language. And they believe that priests are the only ones that can really kind of understand the Bible and what's going on. And that if you let anyone read the Bible, they might get wrong ideas, and they might misinterpret it, and it's going to cause more problems than it's worth, right? And so the Catholic response to all of these things is that, first of all, priests are going to be more formally trained for their jobs. They set up seminaries in which priests basically go to college and they learn how to be the priest. They learn how to make sure that they're fluent in Latin and that they can understand the Bible and that they can read and have a certain level of biblical understanding, and that all churches, all priests needed to be well educated. They're also going to form what we're going to look at is like the special forces of the Catholic unit. They're going to form the Jesuits. Ignatius of Loyola is the one that forms this. And basically, they answer to the Pope. They don't answer to kings or princes. And so they're not a political organization. They're more of a religious organization. You had to go to school for a long period of time to become a full member of the Jesuits, and they would set up schools. And so they would go out in the 1600s, late 1500s, early 1600s, and set up schools and try to teach people to read and write in their common language. They probably teach Latin as well, so people could understand. Understand a little bit of the Bible. So people can understand a little bit of the Bible. And it's going to act as this buffer between the Protestant education movement and the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Church. Okay, the church begins to use the printing press to communicate with its followers. Nuns begin to open up hospitals and orphanages to better serve the community and their needs. And the church begins to make a better connection with the common people. And so people will look at the Protestant Reformation as this move away from the corruption of the church, and then the Catholic Counter-Reformation as a response of the Catholic Church to the Protestant Reformation and to better connect with the regular people of the church. The Catholic response basically stops the spread of Lutheranism and Protestantism, which are kind of interchangeable. And they don't necessarily recapture any of the lands, but they stop losing kingdoms to the ideas of Protestantism. Okay. Overall, you're going to see changes in Europe during this time frame, where literacy is going to raise, almost from 5 to 10% to high 80s, 90s. In a 200-year period, which is 2 or 3 lifetimes, which is pretty incredible. Today I think the literacy rate is probably in the high 90s, where it should be. It should be at 100%. The Catholic Jesuits are going to set up schools. Protestants are going to create schools as well to help people understand the Bible. And the big one is that literacy rate is going to be it's going to come out of that. So if someone's like, well, what are the outcomes of the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation? Well, you're going to see a increase in local control of the churches. You're going to see a decrease in overall control of the Pope, and you're going to see an increase in literacy, and the importance of literacy is going to rise. So those are a couple of things that are going to come about because of the Reformation. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in chapter 7 when we talk about religious wars.